New York is the largest city in the US. It's the country's main financial hub, and it even houses the United Nations. So why isn't New York City the US capital? Well, to start, what was the first American capital? During the War for Independence, wherever the Continental Congress happened to be meeting at any given time was effectively the location of the American capital. They started in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, but when a British army under the command of Sir William Howe occupied the city in September 1777, Congress relocated twice before returning to Philadelphia a year later. Though, despite its size and growing commercial importance, they never went to New York. Probably because they would have all hanged together had they shown their faces there. Why? Because the city actually served as Britain's headquarters for most of the Revolutionary War. They seized New York in late 1776 after George Washington's Continental Army was handed its largest defeat of the war at the Battle of Brooklyn Heights. But after the war, with the city solidly in American hands, why not make New York, even then the country's most populous city, the capital? Well, for a time, it was. The first Congress under the Constitution met in New York's Federal Hall, and George Washington was sworn in there as president. But that didn't last. The main reason why was geography. Southern states didn't want the anti-slavery North to have influence over the capital, and the other reason was money. Specifically, a lack of it, especially in the northern states. Fighting off the world's greatest military isn't cheap. So to clear their debts, the North, supported by Alexander Hamilton, wanted the new United States federal government to take on any debts that the individual states incurred during the War for Independence. But the South, supported by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, were having none of it. The two of them, though mostly Jefferson, wanted as much power and responsibility as possible to remain in the hands of the states, and so they didn't want to give control over debt to the federal government. But they did want some control over that federal government, so Jefferson and Madison met with Hamilton and they came to a compromise. In exchange for establishing the US capital farther south, Jefferson and Madison agreed to the Assumption Act, which made the federal government responsible for the debts owed by states from the Revolutionary War. Continuing to compromise, they also agreed to make the centrally located Philadelphia the US capital for another 10 years, and that the title of capital wouldn't go to any existing city or be within an existing state. Instead, a new federal district under the direct control of Congress would be created by taking exactly 100 square miles of land from Virginia and Maryland along the Potomac River, Washington, D.C. Virginia's bit was returned in 1847. The second American president, John Adams, moved to D.C. on May 15, 1800, and was joined by Congress later that year. The US government has been there ever since. So, poor New York, the largest city in the country that because of political squabble and money, and despite being the center of attention for just 5 short years, was sidelined for a swamp. But at least it's still the capital of New York State, right? No? Albany? Really? Though, actually, that follows with a common theme in early American history, the idea that in a democratic country, different types of power should not be concentrated in one place. Washington, D.C. was just empty land on the banks of the Potomac, of so little significance that Maryland and Virginia gave it away before it was made into a federal district. New York City, on the other hand, was an economic and cultural powerhouse for both the state of New York and the US as a whole, and still is today to an even greater extent. Putting the US capital, which would have brought with it even more power and influence, there, or even just the state capital, would have run contrary to the idea of separation of powers, the founding principle of the US Constitution. And I mean, New York already has Broadway, Times Square, the Empire State Building, and the Statue of Liberty. Did they really need anything else? Hey look, you made it to the end of the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next one. And as always, I've been James, and thank you for watching Look Back History.